I'm Brittany. This is Elle and Shilian. Hang on. And Shilian. And welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. But sometimes we read them, and sometimes we finish them. Finish things. Who can say? We are finishing Volume 3 of Erha today, is my point. Elle is here as a bit of a holdover because we just had our very first warm-up reading stream wherein I read hetero romance novels for around half an hour and some change in order to warm up for these streams that you're seeing right now. And normally those streams will be exclusive to YouTube members and tier 2 and above patrons, but today, as it was the brand new start and the very first stream, it was available to all patrons. So if you fall into either one of those categories, the video should be up for you right now, I believe, or it might be held. It'll be up for you at some point this evening if it's not immediately up there right now. It was a time, and I chose kind of what I think will be an interesting 90s straight romance novel with a very interesting opening scene. But it was a great time. It was a little bit too much fun, and that's why Ella's here. But Shilian is here with the second cup of tea. And let's see, we read for about a couple of hours on here. We will be finishing the volume today. We take a break around halfway through. And what else? There are trigger warnings in the description of this stream in case you need to avail yourself of them. And considering that it's Erha we're talking about, you probably do. And I believe that's it. We are on page 331 for chapter 116, which is called Shizun Meets Rong Ju. By the way, in case you had forgotten, Shizun is evidently meeting Rong Ju today as we finish this fantastic volume. This has been, is what it's been. It's been so criminally good. And I am unbelievably terrified of how we're about to finish it. We have, how many pages do we have? 330. Oh yeah, we're pretty much right on. We usually read about 50 pages over the course of a couple hours with that break, and we have about 50 pages left to go. So here we go. Here we go. I'm not nervous. I don't know what you mean. As soon as Chuan Ning spied light gathering in the Ghost King's hand, he shoved Moran hard and yelled, "Run!" There was no need to tell him again. Moran grabbed Chuan Ning's arm and the two fled toward the palace gates, leaping and bounding through the air. Damn it, Master Huaizui. Hello? Master Huaizui's spell is too careless, Moran cursed as they ran. How could he leave me with a shadow? Of course people are going to see through me. For some reason, even though his disciple was maligning his own master right in front of him, Chuan Ning showed no reaction. He only threw Moran a glance, as if there was something he wanted to say, but in the end, no words left his lips. Trying to escape, the fourth Ghost King snorted, as if I'd let you off that easy. Chuan Ning and Moran were experts at Qinggong. When they saw the palace gates about to close completely, they vaulted off the wall and made to leap over. But in that same moment, the fourth Ghost King summoned lightning into his palm. With a swing of his hand, thunder roared and lightning cracked down to strike the palace gates. In the blink of an eye, the palace walls that had been only 10 feet high shot up into the sky, extending so far above they looked like they were about to meet the heavens. The palace gates themselves continued to close rapidly. They were blocked in on all sides. Moran swore under his breath and dragged Chuan Ning after him as they veered in another direction. If they couldn't exit through the palace gates, they'd go to ground for now. The main thing was to avoid capture by the fourth Ghost King. It was this move that saved them. Every king of the Ghost Realm had their own strengths and their own shortcomings. While the fourth Ghost King was a powerful spellcaster, millennia of debauchery and indulgence had left his physical condition far inferior to the others. Never mind running a mile, a mere 50 steps would leave him gasping for breath. The fourth Ghost King had lazed about for thousands of years, holding fast to the principle of never standing if he could sit, and never sitting if he could lie down. After so long, he'd long let himself go to the point that his qigong was trash. Something about his qigong was trash is beautiful. His outrage grew as he watched Chuan Ning and Mo Run disappear into the distance. Unfortunately for him, the fourth Ghost King's penchant for sweeping up beauties from the other king's domains meant his relationship with his 8 counterparts was rather fraught. Even in a situation like this, he was reluctant to go to the other kings for help capturing the fugitives. So you can run fast, so what? This king may be generously proportioned, but there's still no escaping my grasp. The fourth Ghost King rubbed his paunch, angry and aggrieved. He turned and saw the 8 staunch men who had carried him on their shoulders standing there like statues, and became even more displeased. What are you all standing around for? This king's legs are precious, not meant to give chase. What's stopping you? The guards exchanged a look. It was said that this fourth Ghost King had once been a slender, handsome man, but because he'd been deprived of mortal pleasures for too long, no sooner had he cultivated his flesh body than he ruined it with overindulgence in food and drink. He ate while sitting, ate while walking, ate while reclining, ate while squatting, even at hell's busiest times. When he had to rush out appeals and hardly had time to write, he still required attendance at his left and right, not to flatten papers or grind ink, but to slice fresh fruit and feed him pastries. Just like that, a fine and peerless beauty forcibly fed himself into a porker. Thanks so much. Although his foundation was excellent and his size wouldn't get too out of hand no matter how much he ate, his appearance had nevertheless changed. After that, the fourth Ghost King had ordered that all the second palace's mirrors be thrown out, and he abhorred the words fat and obese. Rumor had it there had once been a pretty attendant who had sung for him, but the first lines of the lyrics had been, "O moon, moon in the sky, round and full, round and..." Before the last word had left her lips, the fourth Ghost King had already sent her flying with a kick to the chest. "Round," he bellowed. "How dare you call this king fat? Did you think you were being clever? The audacity." Which was why, even though these ghost men were strong and hardy, they didn't dare go after Chuan Ning and Mo Run. Each of them bowed low and let the fourth Ghost King complain and vent. In the end, one, more clever than the rest, spoke up. "My king is so nimble. How could we possibly catch up to people my king can't chase down?" Oh, he threaded that needle. Who is he? Promote him. Only then did the fourth Ghost King huff out a breath and give up on pursuit altogether. He turned to his subordinates. That's true. It's good that you are all self-aware. Very well, leave it. You may pass on this king's command. All the doors of the second palace are to be shut, and the palace walls covered in sealing spells. Not a single fly shall escape. He clicked his tongue, then spat out the grape seed he'd been holding in his mouth. "I'd like to see how far those two think they can get," he muttered darkly. That's a scene break. Mo Run and Chuan Ning were both agile, and the interior of the palace was full of twists and turns. It didn't take long for them to ditch the ghosts on their tail. The two hid in a dark and narrow little alley. Chuan Ning was a ghost. No matter how far they ran, he wouldn't tire. Oh, no, that's a good point. Mo Run, however, was of mortal flesh, and he leaned against the wall, panting. Chuan Ning peered around the corner. "He's completely sealed the palace," he observed somberly. Mo Run was still catching his breath and merely waved his hand. "It's fine, Shizun. Come into the soul-calling lantern, then we can return directly to the mortal realm. There's no way he can stop us." Chuan Ning gave a small nod. For some reason, worry still colored his brows. Mo Run didn't notice. He took out the soul-calling lantern and silently recited the spell. The golden light flickered a few times, then winked out. Chuan Ning's earth soul yet stood before him, quite unmoved. We knew there were going to be more problems, and yet I'm over here surprised Pikachu that there's more problems. "Hello, how did I lose my place that easily?" she said, after a lifetime of losing her place easily. "What's going on?" Mo Run was shocked. "Why isn't it working?" The line between Chuan Ning's brows furrowed deeper, and he sighed. "I thought so. The deliverance spell won't work here. We probably have to leave the palace before we can use that spell to return to the mortal realm." Upon hearing this, Mo-Run bit his lip and a stubborn look came into his eyes. After a moment, he said, voice hoarse, "I'll get you out of here no matter what." Chuan Ning gave him a look. "We'll need to hurry. The palace complex is massive, so it should be difficult for the ghost minions to find us, but there's no food or water here. I'll be fine, but you won't last long." Mo-Run smiled. "I didn't have much to eat growing up. I'm used to it." Not casually, just so casually. The two recovered for a spell, biding their time while their surroundings quietened? Why is that impossible for me to say? I think there's an extra letter and it's supposed to be quieted. Eventually, they crept out of the alleyway. The cool, rippling moonlight fell upon their figures, one with a shadow, one without, as they walked side by side down the long, empty bluestone street. "Shizun," Mo-Run called out. Chuan Ning waited in silence for him to continue. "I offended you earlier at the gate." "Sorry." Chuan Ning seemed caught off guard. Then his eyes flicked down, his long lashes obscuring his gaze. "It's fine." "Due to circumstances, my words were also offensive. I'm sorry about that too." Chuan Ning listened without responding. "It was also incredibly improper of me to say you were already married. I'm sorry again." Chuan Ning stopped in his tracks. "How long are you going to keep saying I'm sorry?" he snapped, his voice icy. "Don't you know how to say anything else?" Something else? Mo-Run's heart started to race. He thought very hard for a moment, then very carefully tried a change in wording. Then, I apologize?" Chuan Ning shook out his sleeves and stalked off without a word. Poor Mo-Run had absolutely no idea what he'd said to make his Shizun unhappy. On the one hand, he was worried he had further irritated him. On the other, he was afraid that if he continued, Chuan Ning would become only more incensed. He stood and scratched his head, then followed obediently. "Shizun?" As he strode to catch up, Mo-Run asked in spite of himself, "Have you ever experienced any karmic events?" Chuan Ning stopped and turned to face him. "What do you mean?" "I found another earth soul of yours in the underworld, which means you have one extra piece of soul compared to everyone else. Earlier, I met Chushun at Tailwind Hall and asked him about it. He said the extra soul likely wasn't yours originally." Mo-Run continued, hesitant. "But, including your body in the mortal realm, I've definitely seen 4 Shizuns. So I was wondering if Shizun formed any bonds of fate in the past." Chuan Ning was silent for a time. A light flared in the depths of his eyes, like something had occurred to him. But then he closed them and said, "I don't think I have." He paused then, uncertain and a little confused, asked, "I really have 4 souls?" "Mm-hmm." Chuan Ning didn't know why either. He contemplated it for a while, then sighed. "I don't know the answer, but it doesn't seem to be affecting anything, so let's set it aside for now." Bitch, there's like 9 to 11 volumes in this freaking series. You better not be setting it aside for that long. The two carefully patted down remote little paths as they inspected the spiritual strength of the spell the 4th Ghost King had employed to seal off the 2nd palace. "All barriers have a weakness," Chuan Ning said as they came before a watchtower. His fingers skimmed across the rough walls, over which washed an intermittent blue light. He closed his eyes, trying to capture the flow of the energy streaming beneath the stones. But without any spiritual power to draw on, his attempt to feel out the spell drained him in seconds. Chuan Ning let his hand fall and shook his head, dejected. "My soul isn't whole, and my powers are diminished. I don't know how to break through this." "Why doesn't Shizun teach me, and I'll give it a go?" Mo-Run suggested. "It won't work. Barriers are a complex art. It's not something you can learn in a day or two. Then what are the typical weak points of spiritual barriers? Moran asked. We could try them one by one. Chuan Ning eyed him. Every barrier has its own weakness. There isn't a one-size-fits-all method to breaking them. If we were to test them one by one, I can't imagine how long it would take. How will we know if we don't try? Moran smiled. Who knows? Maybe I'll get lucky. Oh, God. Chuan Ning had opened his mouth to reply when he spotted a white shadow flit past at the edge of his vision. His brows knitted at once, and he extended his hand, moving out of habit to summon Tianwen. Nothing happened. His expression darkened, and he asked sharply, Who's there? That white shadow immediately attempted to flee. Like Moran would let that happen. He darted over and, in one ferocious instant, captured the figure in his arms. He clapped a hand over the ghost's mouth and nose to prevent it from calling out, then twisted its arms behind its back and forced it to its knees. When he finally got a good look and saw who it was, he couldn't help but burst out in anger. Rong Ju! Of course! The young man kneeling on the ground was tender and fair, like willow vines drifting in the breeze, but his eyes brimmed with defiance. Defiance was a key word in the warm-up stream today. He twisted his head away and refused to utter a single word. Running off to snitch again, Moran demanded. You really think I won't kill you? Chuan Ning strode over. He had never met Rong Ju before, and after looking him over, asked Moran, You know him? Moran didn't know what to say. He thought back on those 2 crimes of stealing and debauchery, the ones Chuan Ning had publicly tried him for on the platform of sin and virtue. At the time, he'd thought Chuan Ning cruel and malicious, and his heart had been steeped in hatred. Now that the sordid history was once more thrust in his face, Moran wanted nothing more than to find a hole to crawl into and hide. Chuan Ning, however, noticed none of this. He only took this person to be an acquaintance of Moran. Since he followed you all the way here, don't leave him behind in the palace. Once we find a way out, let's bring him along. As he spoke, he looked Rong Ju over carefully. A perfectly decent person. Reincarnation should be top priority. Moran was struck speechless. Upon hearing these words, Rong Ju, who had been quietly panicking, was at first taken aback. He suddenly smiled. His eyes softened, and his gaze was gentle and charming as he glanced toward Moran. This must be Shizun, then? What do you mean, Shizun? Who said you could call him that? Moran said angrily. He's my Shizun. Rong Ju was still resentful, so he drawled infuriatingly. Oh, I see. My Shizun, then. You... Watching this back and forth, Chuan Ning finally detected something amiss. Moran, he asked, are there some hard feelings between you two? Dear Shizun, Rong Ju replied with a smile, don't be angry with him. There are no hard feelings between us, just some past relations. His words were ambiguous, but his tone was awfully suggestive. Chuan Ning said nothing, but his eyes narrowed, and his lips slowly pressed themselves into a thin line. His expression at first glance was as indifferent as ever, but there was a gloominess between his brows that couldn't be fully concealed. Rong Ju had grown up in a brothel and was adept at reading expressions. How could Chuan Ning, pure and naive as he was, hide the emotion flickering in his eyes from Rong Ju? Rong Ju was rather shocked. All this time he'd thought Moran a sleazy philanderer, audaciously in love with his own Shizun. Yet unexpectedly, now that he'd met the Shizun in question, it didn't seem one-sided. How filthy this Xisheng Peak was. Despite his current peril, Rong Ju still couldn't help but sigh. He was both disgusted and amazed. Dual cultivation between men was not unheard of in the cultivation realm, but it was considered unseemly nonetheless. Moran was a young Gongja of Xisheng Peak. If word got out that he and his benefacting mentor were an item, sect leader Shui Jungyang would be unable to show his face in public. Rong Ju blinked his expressive peach blossom eyes and sized up Chuan Ning. He parted his lips to say a few more words, ready to add oil to the flames, but Chuan Ning spoke first. You're already dead. What's the point in bringing up past relations? Well, wasn't Xianjun the one who asked me? Rong Ju smiled. I only answer honestly. Who asked you? Chuan Ning said frostily. I was asking him. There was no need to clarify who him was. Chuan Ning's tone was laced with sparks. His meaning couldn't have been clearer. Don't get friendly with me. When Moran heard Chuan Ning taking his side, Moran's heart swelled and warmth bloomed in his chest. He wanted to say something, but before he could move in closer, Chuan Ning had already turned around in a huff. You deal with this. Moran didn't know what to do. If he let Rong Ju go, there was a chance the little tart would turn around and rat on them. But keeping Rong Ju around would be like carrying a barrel of gunpowder. If he were to run his mouth in front of Chuan Ning, his Shizun just might choke to death. As Moran agonized, Chuan Ning went back to inspect Fourth Ghost King's barrier once more. The second he was out of earshot, Moran yanked Rong Ju by the collar and ground out, voice hushed. What do you want? It's just that I'm profoundly irritated. Rong Ju's thick lashes flickered softly, and a faint light shimmered in his gaze. I can't bear to see a villain like you get a do-over. You know? Understandable. That's pretty valid. Yeah. But Moran had a good handle on Rong Ju's character. He wasn't the kind of person who would allow himself to come to harm for the sake of harming others. He'd only ever choose a course that harm others and benefit himself. Resentful as he might be, his top priority was to spend his days in comfort. He had no reason to risk death to follow them. Moran's eyes swept over Rong Ju and landed on his feet. Only one shoe adorned his delicate and fair foot. The other was bare and smeared with mud. He had obviously fled somewhere in a hurry. Moran narrowed his eyes. Tell the truth. Didn't I already say it? Rong Ju asked. The truth is, I can't stand. If you're thinking of trying to blackmail me with more lies, I will blindfold and gag you, then toss you down a well. You're already a ghost, so you won't die from hunger, and you won't be able to escape. If you're lucky, the patrol may find you in a couple of days. If you're not, prepare to be stuck in that well for 8 to 10 years. Moran paused, and when he continued, his voice was deep and dark. You decide. As expected, Rong Ju blanched. I changed my mind, he said. I don't want to stay here. You have to take me with you. What, don't you want to be a ghost husband anymore? Rong Ju bit down hard on his lip. Then he angrily raised his head and said, I want to live a normal life too. I want another start. He inhaled deeply and declared, I want to be reincarnated. Fine. Then let me ask you another question. Were you the one who blabbed to the patrol and told them where I was? Rong Ju didn't answer. Even if you don't want to say, I have ways to make you fess up. A red light glimmered in Moran's hand and he commanded, voice low, Speak. Yes, I was the one who told, but so what? Rong Ju held his head high, his eyes shining with resentment. If I didn't tell them so they all went to look, how could I have escaped? Moran released Rong Ju's collar and flung him away, laughing through his fury. Well, you certainly know how to hit someone when they're down, I'll give you that. I'm not bad at slander either. Rong Ju put himself back together slowly, patting his robes back into place. He shot a look at Chuan Ning, who stood just a short distance away. Mo Shenjun, you really care about him, don't you? What if I told him all about how you used to dote on me? I wouldn't even need to exaggerate. How do you think he'd take it? That's the end of the chapter. Just curious, apropos of nothing, can you kill a ghost? Can you kill someone twice? Can they be like a super ghost? Like a ghost, like a double dead ghost? Something like that. Is that possible? I'm just asking for a friend. It's neither here nor there. Page 343 for chapter 117, which is called Shizun Tells Me to Get the Hell Out. Excuse me. What Rong Ju meant to imply, of course, was that Chuan Ning would certainly become upset and jealous that he wouldn't be able to handle hearing such things. But Mo had no idea that Chuan Ning had actually loved him all along. He mulled it over and only thought that Rong Ju was threatening to tell Chuan Ning about his past indiscretions. For a master to have to sit by and listen to his own disciples' many outrageous acts recounted one by one, how mortifying would that be? Wouldn't he drop dead from anger? So he snapped, "You leave him alone." Rong Ju smiled coquettishly, beautifully effeminate, even as a man. "If you protect me and take me with you, I promise I'll behave," he said softly. "I won't breathe a word or make a bit of trouble." Mo Run was left with no choice. He cursed under his breath and turned to walk back toward Chuan Ning. Rong Ju followed gleefully at his heels. He knew silent acquiescence when he saw it. But Mo Run had barely taken 2 steps before he turned on his heel and pointed a finger at Rong Ju. "If you put so much as a toe out of line, Rong Ju," he hissed, low and threatening, "I'll make sure to scatter your soul before you can even touch the gate of reincarnation." Scattering souls! Hello! Kill a ghost twice? Duh! There we are. Rong Ju was the picture of affected coyness as he replied sweetly, "You don't mess with me, and I won't mess with you. I'll behave as long as you don't mistreat me. Shouldn't you, of all people, know what I'm like, Mo Shenjun? You're my old regular, after all." Mo Run didn't know what to say. He was as disgusted now by those soft saccharine tones as he had been fond of them in the past life. But there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. He watched Rong Ju drift over to Chuan Ning's side. Mo Run really couldn't understand it. Had he been blind back then, or what? Song Chu Tong, Rong Ju. How the hell had he managed to fall for these people? Introspection! Oh, honey! Oh! Welcome to the club. There is so much growth and so much pain, but so much growth. Ugh. If he could be reborn into his old life and face his past self, he'd give anything to grab Taishan-jun by the neck and open his head up just to see how much water had gotten in there. Seriously, what the hell was he thinking? Luckily, Rong Ju hadn't said anything outright, and Chuan Ning was basically a blank slate when it came to matters of the heart. After a few words of explanation smilingly delivered by seasoned veteran Rong Ju, Chuan Ning's tightly furrowed brow gradually relaxed. By the end, he was quite convinced that he was the one with the impure thoughts to have so misunderstood what this young man meant by past relations earlier. Though his expression remained unchanged, he secretly felt rather embarrassed about the whole thing. If Rong Ju meant to tag along, he had to earn his keep. He was the one most familiar with the place, so he shared his knowledge of the... most familiar with the palace, so he shared his knowledge of the place. "This street isn't well trafficked, but it's not exactly hidden," he said. "Let's go somewhere a little more secure while you two figure out how to break the barrier." This somewhere was a storehouse for clothing and textiles in the underworld. Bolts upon bolts of white burlap cloth were piled high within, a perfect hiding spot. The trio picked a dusty corner to hole up in. Chuan Ning felt along the wall with his fingertips as if taking a patient's pulse, trying his best to feel out the spiritual barrier currently covering the entire second palace. But after a long while, he had still made no progress, while his soul grew increasingly weaker for his efforts. Mo Run placed his hand over Chuan Ning's and tugged it off the wall. "Get some rest." Frustrated and helpless, Chuan Ning seethed as he stared at his own hand. Why is the soul missing spiritual powers of all things? What if I gave you some of mine? I wouldn't be able to use it. Chuan Ning glanced at Rong Ju sitting off in the distance and lowered his voice. You're a living person. I'm a ghost. Yin and yang energies are dissonant. After a short break, Chuan Ning was back at it. If he'd had his other 3 souls and his spiritual powers, he could have simply sent a burst of spiritual energy into the barrier and pinpointed the weakness in the 4th Ghost King's spell. But right now, he had hardly any spiritual energy at all. Although he forced what tiny bit he had into the barrier, trying to seek out its weakness, it was hopelessly difficult, like looking for a single leaf in the vast ocean. 2 hours passed in this manner. Rong Ju was starting to get restless. He ran over and tugged at Mo Run. So, can we get out or not? Knock it off and go sit down, said Mo Run. Come on, I'm worried sick. Just tell me if we can get out or not. Worrying won't do you any good. Be patient. Isn't your Shizun supposed to be super powerful? Rong Ju whined. It's been ages. Why isn't anything happening? He only has one of his 3 souls, and this one's missing spiritual powers. Can you just shush? His words seemed to leave Rong Ju dejected, and his lovely lashes flickered as he sat back down on the pile of white burlap cloth. 2 more hours passed, and then some. Rong Ju got up and padded over to Chuan Ning. Xianjun, is there no other way? Fingertips still pressed to the wall, Chuan Ning replied without opening his eyes. No. Then is there any way to recover at least some of your powers? Chuan Ning thought for a moment. Do you have any spiritual energy? He asked. No. Rong Ju was taken back. Why does Xianjun ask? If you did, you could have passed me some to use. It's that easy? Rong Ju exclaimed. Then hurry, have Mo Xianjun. Chuan Ning cut him off. He is useless. Rong Ju, of course, didn't know that Mo Run wasn't truly a ghost. As soon as he heard that Mo Run's spiritual energy couldn't be used, his smile froze on his face. How come? Different elements is all, Mo Run cut in. He knew Chuan Ning was awful at lying, and it'd be best if Rong Ju didn't learn the truth about his less than ghostly state. Can you please just go keep watch outside and tell us if you see anyone coming? Rong Ju shot him an irate glare. But the 3 of them were all in the same boat right now, so he dragged his feet over to the storehouse entrance and reluctantly leaned against the door, picking at his nails as he peered about outside with that pair of hazy peach blossom eyes. Mo Run glanced over at him before taking a seat next to Chuan Ning. He hesitated for some time, but in the end, he decided he didn't want to keep anything from him. Shizun, he spoke up. I want to apologize for some wrongs I've committed. What wrongs? Do you remember that time you had me reprimanded at the platform of sin and virtue for... Mo Run paused, too embarrassed to say debauchery. A person's face truly was a mysterious thing. Thick as the Great Wall when they didn't care, thin as a sheet of paper, and just as flimsy the moment they did. Mo Run lowered his head bashfully. In a small voice, he said, for breaking the 4th, 9th, and 15th commandments. The 4th commandment, thievery. The 9th commandment, debauchery. The 15th commandment, deceit. Of course, Chuan Ning hadn't forgotten. He opened his eyes but didn't look at Mo Run. When he saw that cool, disciplined expression, Mo Run felt doubly ashamed. He dropped his gaze and, after a second, whispered, Shizun, I'm sorry. Chuan Ning had already guessed what he was going to say. He did feel aggrieved, but he had ever kept a level head in difficult situations. Besides, it wasn't as though he was only now learning of the sleazy things Mo Run did back then. Weren't you already punished for that? He replied coolly. And there was no repeat of those offenses. Why bring it up now? Because that Rong Ju outside, Mo Run couldn't finish the sentence, and Chuan Ning was also silent for a long while. Then Mo Run heard him scoff. So he's the one? He didn't dare look up. Xisheng Peak didn't require its disciples to abstain from worldly pleasures, and it was perfectly ordinary for its young people to dual cultivate or see a lover outside the sect. But Chuan Ning was different. His cultivation path upheld purity of heart and mind, and he had always treated carnal matters with contempt. Not to mention, Mo Run hadn't even been properly seeing someone back then like a normal young person, but had instead slept around in brothels. Shui Jingyong might not have cared much, given how he spoiled his nephew. Mo Run was of age, and it wasn't like he cultivated the path of purity. Anyway, it wouldn't be healthy for a young man to suppress his needs, thus his uncle would close one eye and let it go. But Chuan Ning couldn't tolerate it. He'd be disgusted. Mo Run had already witnessed such a reaction when he'd been punished on the platform of sin and virtue. In Chuan Ning's eyes back then, he had clearly seen his disgust, contempt, and loathing. It had already been so many years, and he hadn't whored or stolen since. But now Chuan Ning had run into Rong Ju in the underworld. How could it possibly not bother him? At that moment, Mo-Run truly felt the weight of the words, "You reap what you sow." I don't think that's true. I don't think you fully felt the weight of that yet. Unfortunately. Because we have several more books in this series. I don't think that is no, I think you have so much ahead of you. I think you're gonna reap so much of what you sowed. Yeah. I'm not anxious about it. He wasn't afraid of being scolded or hit by Chuan Ning. In fact, he'd prefer if he took out Tianwen at once and delivered another round of lashing. Just as long as nothing went awry, as long as the Earth Soul he had gone through so much to find didn't sweep off in a huff over this past affair. If Chuan Ning were to leave in a fit of rage, Mo-Run really might kill himself. You know, that seems like an overstatement, and it usually is in most any kind of romantic story. It almost always is. But because we know about Mo-Run what we know, we can actually understand as to why he might do that. And it's not strictly because of Chuan Ning. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he'd felt. Rather than keeping Rong Ju around like a powder keg on legs, he figured it'd be better to come clean himself and apologize to Chuan Ning up front. He'd had it all planned out. He had deliberately placed himself between Chuan Ning and the door as he confessed. That way, if his Shizun tried to stalk off after hearing him out, he could grab him, tie him up if necessary, whatever offense he had to resort to prevent him from disappearing and leaving Mo-Run behind. Chuan Ning could be as furious as he liked after this was all over. Mo-Run was mentally practicing how to block off Chuan Ning's escape routes when the fabric of Chuan Ning's robes shifted slightly in the gloom. The dim light caught on scarlet silk and golden embroidery. Even Mo-Run's heart was trembling as he ventured in a small voice, "Shizun, this is all ancient history, and punishment's already been meted out," Chuan Ning said. "So what are you telling me all this for?" He cast Mo-Run a sidelong glance, his face coolly indifferent as his thin lips parted deliberately, even a touch sardonically. "Why should I care?" Something like "why should I care" was the last thing Mo-Run had expected him to say. Mo-Run was dumbstruck. He didn't taste any of the vinegar dripping from Chuan Ning's words. All he felt was panic. He thought his Shizun had lost all hope in him, didn't want to bother with him anymore, didn't care about him anymore. "Shizun," he said frantically, "everything in the past was totally my fault. Please don't be mad." "Why would I be mad? What's there to be mad about?" Despite his words, the more Chuan Ning thought about it, the more irritated he felt. Finally, he snapped, heated. "I knew things weren't so clean between the two of you. Past relations, indeed. Are you still trying to pull the wool over my eyes? Get out." Mo-Run said nothing. "Out!" Chuan Ning was painfully aware of the sourness in his voice. He well knew this affair was over and done, yet he couldn't help but mutter under his breath, "Absolutely shameless." Mo-Run did not get out. He continued to sit dumbly next to Chuan Ning, staring at him with that pair of bright, insistent black eyes. After a moment, he said, "I'm not leaving." Chuan Ning was incensed. "Leave? I don't want to see you right now." "I'm not leaving," Mo-Run mumbled. He sat and refused to budge, like a stupid piece of rock. He was such a despicable person, yet as he stared at Chuan Ning, the rims of his eyes growing red, he was somehow also a bit pitiful, a bit stubborn. "I'm afraid that if I go, you'll run away. Shizun, don't leave me behind." Chuan Ning fell silent. He'd never imagined that this was what had been on Mo-run's mind. It was true that he felt revolted every time his affair was brought up, but it wasn't news to him. He was also aware of the common practice in the cultivation world. Be it men or women, once they came of age, provided their cultivation path was not one that forbade it, practically everyone indulged in some degree of dissolution. It was nothing to raise eyebrows at. Mo-run was no Shui Meng. His cousin had grown up sheltered and coddled, with upstanding parents and a strict education. He'd always been well-behaved, unlike some other young masters. But Mo-run? A willful personality, always doing whatever he liked. Raised in the pleasure houses, no father and a courtesan for a mother. He was a wild, unruly pup who had grown up without guidance and screwed around day in and day out for 15 years before his uncle plucked him from the mire, his fur covered in mud. Dumb husky. Only an idiot would think he was clean and pure like a fine piece of jade, and Chuan Ning was no idiot. Yet it was one thing to know all that, and quite another to see Rong Ju with his own eyes, this beautiful person who had shared Mo-run's bed in the past. Chuan Ning was still grossed out. He'd failed to shoo Mo-run away, so he turned back to the wall, closed his eyes, and went back to checking the barrier. But as he worked, he couldn't help thinking about Rong Ju's pretty little oval-shaped face, that fair, tender-looking skin that was surely soft and smooth to the touch, and those pert little lips, petal pink and dripping honeyed words. That damnable Mo-run had certainly kissed them before. That slender waist, that figure. In spite of himself, he even thought about how Mo-run must have been all tangled in bed with that effeminate little thing. How revolting. Honey. Oh, honey. When it came to some things, hearing about them was an altogether different matter from seeing with one's own eyes. Now that he had seen, he couldn't help thinking about it, and the more he thought about it, the less he could stomach it. Chuan Ning's eyes suddenly snapped open, flames of anger blazing within. He stood up and shoved Mo-run away, none too gently. Get the hell out. Shizun, out. Mo-run had no choice but to lower his head and trudge slowly out of the storehouse. Rong Ju was surprised to see him. Oh, Mo Shinjun, did you quarrel with your Shizun? Mo-run didn't even want to acknowledge him. Just the sight of him gave him a headache. He had been fond of him in the past life because he looked somewhat like Shimei, and when he had slept with him after his rebirth in this life, it had been with a grudge and intent of screwing him over. But be that as it may, his past deeds were like marks carved into a wooden post, impossible to restore to its original state. I'll keep watch by myself, Mo-run said. Go find somewhere else to sit. Seeing as the door was the least safe place in the storehouse, Rong Ju was only too happy to comply. But after walking a mere 2 steps away, he couldn't resist a look back at Mo-run. He was a little curious as to how Mo-run had died. How had his personality changed so much in the few years since they had last seen each other? It was as if he'd gone through some kind of harrowing experience. Truly quite curious. Pretty lashes aflutter, Rong Ju looked Mo-run up and down from where he stood behind him. He had a sudden feeling that something was a little odd. He examined him again, more carefully this time. His gaze came to rest on the smudge of a shadow at Mo-run's feet. Rong Ju froze in shock. That's the end of the chapter. We're on page 353 for chapter 118, which is rather curiously called Shizun Sometimes Falls for Tricks Too. Huh. Well, you know, for every one, like, really on-the-nose chapter title, like Shizun Tells Me to Get the Hell Out, or whatever the hell the last chapter title was, for every, like, on-the-nose one, there's at least, like, 8 either cryptic or misleading ones. So, honestly, this tracks. Mo Run had a shadow. He wasn't dead? I can never remember if it's panoply or like panoply. Kind of like canopy. Shit. Because I've read it more than I've said it. A panoply? That doesn't... A panoply. Also, neither... You know what? Neither one's great. Watch both of them be wrong. A panoply of little details flashed through Rong Ju's mind. The shock would have sent a chill up his spine and a rush of hot blood to his head to scramble his thoughts if he weren't already dead. Rong Ju stood unmoving for some time. The way a person reacted to unforeseen events often had to do with what they were accustomed to. For instance, some people's past experiences made them habitually jumpy, and they would freeze up at the first sign of the unexpected. Then there were people like Shui Meng, darling of the heavens, who were self-possessed and difficult to ruffle, unfazed by just about everything. As for Rong Ju, who had wallowed in the mud all his life and suffered every manner of hardship, his immediate thoughts were, did it pose a threat to him? And if not, how could he benefit from it? I mean, that's it. That's what? Is that all like technically 3 sentences. That's Rong Ju in 3 sentences. For better or worse, and it's usually worse. Within seconds, he realized, first, that Mo Run was a living person who had snuck into the underworld, and second, that he stood to gain much from this knowledge. He merely needed to expose Mo Run, and he'd have done the underworld a great service. Such an achievement would undoubtedly land him an official position of some sort, and from there he could strut about with his chest puffed out. So what if he had sold his body in life? If he seized this opportunity, he could at least move up in the world, as men ought, in death. But you wanted to go... You wanted reincarnation, though, right? I mean, only to get a second chance to have a better bearing in life, really. And if you can have that position now... I hate that it makes sense. The opportunity was practically handed to him on a silver platter. Why bother with reincarnation? He could skip all that and secure a comfortable life without delay. It would be a complete upset. He would erase all his past disgrace and start fresh. Indeed. Rong Ju's peach blossom eyes narrowed subtly, and something flickered within. He could see it now, being bestowed positions of import and titles of nobility, sitting behind draped silks on a bamboo sedan chair like those officials of the underworld, a picture of poise as he floated above the throng of ghosts below. The more Rong Ju thought about it, the more gleeful he felt. There was just one problem. He was weak and delicate, and there was no way he could sneak out from under Mo Run's nose to go tell on him. He'd need to keep Mo Run occupied. The gears in his mind turned, and his gaze fell on the red-robed Chuan Ning. Chu Xinjun. Rong Ju greeted Chuan Ning and took a seat next to him, his cheek propped in his hand. Chuan Ning continued to probe at the barrier without so much as a grunt of acknowledgement. The man was so cold, Rong Ju could practically see a layer of frost on his closed lashes. Rong Ju tried again. Still nothing? A few moments passed. Chuan Ning still didn't reply, but neither did he chase him off. So Rong Ju sat and chattered idly about this and that, as if talking to himself. Eventually he muttered in a soft voice, "To tell you the truth, Chu Xinjun, I wasn't completely honest with you earlier. There's something... I was afraid you'd look down on me if you knew, but that you would harden your heart against me and leave me behind." Chuan Ning's pitch-black brows were drawn tightly together, and though he had yet to speak, a flame of anger burned between them. He was still maintaining tight control, restraining himself from letting it out, but how could Rong Ju possibly miss that flickering light? "I was thinking it over while I was outside," Rong Ju said in his delicate voice. "I feel so terrible about lying to Shanchun, so I wanted to come say sorry." As luck would have it, his opener just so happened to match Mo Run's. Both of them wanted to say sorry. Chuan Ning wasn't even that repulsed until Rong Ju opened his mouth and came out with these words. He finally, slowly, opened his eyes and, keeping his gaze trained on the wall, asked in a frosty tone, "Which brothel did you work at when you were alive?" Rong Ju was caught off guard. Shenzhen already knew? He stole a glance over at Mo Run and swore internally. To think that guy had actually come clean on his own. Would it be enough for Rong Ju to fan the flames like this? Mo Shenzhen and I... Chuan Ning cut him off. I said, which brothel did you work at when you were alive? Rong Ju bit his lip. The Immortal Peach Pavilion in Black Bamboo Town. Immortal Peach Pavilion. Chuan Ning repeated the name with a wry tug of his lips. Though he said no more, his expression was terrifying. Rong Ju snuck several glances at him, then he pursed his lips and ventured, You don't look down on me, do you, Chu Shenzhen? Chuan Ning did not reply. I lived a hard life and had a feeble body, and was sold to the brothel very young. If I'd had a choice, of course, I'd want to be a demon-slaying hero like Shenzhen, too. Rong Ju sighed wistfully. It'd be wonderful if, in my next life, I could become an outstanding person like Shenzhen. Reincarnation won't change the nature of a soul, Chuan Ning said, impassive. My condolences, but you and I belong to different walks of life. Even after being shut down like this, Rong Ju's smile didn't falter in the slightest. I know I could never compare with Shenzhen. I got tea in my hair. That was such a cold-ass burn. I know I could never compare with Shenzhen, he said, lowering his gaze. It was just wishful thinking. When it comes to people like me, if we don't give ourselves something to hope for, a dream to cling to, we wouldn't last a year in the brothels before plotting how to end it all. No response. Rong Ju glanced at Mo Run out of the corner of his eye, checking to make sure he was out of earshot of their little chat. After all, he continued with a soft sigh, the guests at the brothel were so often cruel and callous. They hardly saw us as human. In a place like that, receiving a visit from a kindly guest like Mo Shenzhen was a thing to be envied. Chuan Ning remained silent, but the veins on the back of his hand stood out where it was pressed against the wall. Had he still possessed his powers, there would undoubtedly be 5 holes in that wall right now. He seemed to struggle with himself for a long moment. Finally, he asked, voice dark and low, What's there to be envious of? Damn. First a burn and then a self-burn, you know what I mean? But then again, it's Chuan Ning. We really shouldn't be surprised. A trace of affection blossomed on Rong Ju's gentle, lovely face. Not too much nor too little, precisely the right amount. That Mo Shenzhen is a good person, of course. Although he might have erred and stolen from me in the end, I can only imagine it's because I served him poorly in the past. He'd always been such a reasonable, charming person. Chuan Ning's face was cold and indifferent as he listened without a word, raging with jealousy as it seethed beneath his skin. Everyone who ever served him at my place mentioned how good and kind he was. We always looked forward to his next visit. After a long pause, Chuan Ning asked, Did he go often? Rong Ju feigned a dry laugh. How often is often? I'm not quite sure how to answer Shenzhen's question. Then tell me how regularly he went, for whom he asked, and when his last visit was. Those thin lips were like a pair of knives, and each question glinted with a cold, dangerous light, as if aiming for Mo Run's life. Oh, you're just gonna torture yourself with all this information, baby. That's like jealousy 101. You want to know, but you don't actually want to know. Rong Ju pretended not to notice the frosty gleam in Chuan Ning's eyes. Embellishing liberally, he answered. I did get the right line, right? Yes, I did. I really didn't keep track of how often he came. Pun not intended. But I used to see him at least 10 days a month, if not more. As for whom he asked for, it varied. Rong Ju sighed. It's all in the past now, Chu Xianjun, so please don't hold it against him. 10 times a month. 10 times a month. I asked when his last visit was. By now, Chuan Ning's face might as well have been one thick layer of ice. Answer the question. Mo Run, in fact, had never gone back to see Rong Ju after the day he'd been reborn, nor had he visited any other brothel. But Rong Ju took one look at Chuan Ning's expression and knew the truth wouldn't do. He feigned uncertainty and stoked the flames some more. Yeah. 10 times a month? Yeah. I'm not sure, but I do remember seeing Mo Xianjun around the brothel now and again, up until the time I died, so probably around then? Jesus Christ. We were just getting past the whole miscommunication issue and realizing the importance of being on the same page, and now someone's deliberately coming along to fuck with that. He had barely finished when Chuan Ning shot to his feet, pulling his hand from the wall so that his wide sleeve fell over his slender fingers. In the murky dark, his eyes blazed with sparks and his entire body trembled. Although actually, I guess that lesson was mainly learned by Mo Run. How did I lose my place this badly? I am at the end of the page. In the murky dark, his eyes blazed with sparks and his entire body trembled. Rong Ju was privately delighted. This guileless Xianjun was too easy to fool. Rong Ju was a prostitute, a veteran in the arena of love affairs, an expert at reading the feelings of others. Baiting someone so virtuous and upright as Chuan Ning was child's play. He had him hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, but if/when Mo Run figures out what the hell you've done... Rong Ju had carefully prepared a nervous expression, and he deployed it now. What is it, Chu Xianjun? He asked anxiously. Did I say something wrong? They're all misdeeds of a previous lifetime now. Please don't blame Mo Xianjun. He's not a bad person. Like I need you to tell me if he's a bad person or not, Chuan Ning snapped. He shook with fury. If I want to teach my own disciple a lesson, what business is it of yours? Chu Xianjun. Chuan Ning ignored him completely. A chill emanated from his gaze, even as sparks flew from the rage that blazed in his eyes. Rong Ju attempted to block his way, but Chuan Ning shoved him aside and strode over to the door of the storehouse. He grabbed Mo Run by the back of his collar and yanked him to his feet. Mo Run looked back, startled. Shizun? Chuan Ning retracted his hand, as if even the collar of Mo Run's robes was too filthy to touch. He stared his disciple down like a cheetah on the hunt, growling low in his throat and preparing to pounce. Yet even after several long seconds passed, he was still much too angry to speak. What was there to say at this point? If Mo Run hadn't reformed even after his public reprimand on the platform of sin and virtue, if he had apologized and acted like a decent human being before Chuan Ning all this time, but was in truth still sneaking off to this or that peach parting pavilion or cut-sleeve lodge to fool around with prostitutes, Mo Run had no idea he'd been slandered. All he saw was the darkness on Chuan Ning's face, his expression one of anger, revulsion, and, though he wasn't sure if he'd imagined it, stifled sadness. Mo Wei Yu, how many of your words were truth and how many were lies? Chuan Ning's voice was hoarse and his lashes quivered. After a second, he said lowly, You really are vile by nature, beyond remedy. All we can freaking hope for is that Mo Run notices the heel turn, although it's not even quite really a heel turn. But all we can hope for is that Mo Run realizes that this is kind of a sharp uptick in behavior from Chuan Ning and be suspicious enough of Rong Ju to immediately turn and be like, what did that bitch do? You know? I don't know, man. He's gonna have to roll pretty high on his insight check to put it in D&D terminology. Those words were like a boulder crashing into the ocean, churning up a massive wave in its wake. Mo Run flinched violently. He stumbled back 2 steps, shaking his head, staring at Chuan Ning in dismay. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. Those were the words Chuan Ning had spoken in his past life when he'd lost all hope in him. Oh God, that's right! That's right! Son of a... No, that's right. Why would he say that now? Wasn't everything going so well? Yes, that's weird. Mo Run had no idea what had happened. Come on, dumb husky. He flew into a panic. He tried to speak, but Chuan Ning cut him off, the rims of his eyes growing red as anger blazed through his gaze like wildfire. How long do you plan to lie to me? He asked, voice raw. Mo Run's mind was in chaos. What lie? What had Chuan Ning learned? Mo Run had too many dirty, unspeakable secrets. Faced with Chuan Ning's terrifying glare, he didn't even think to suspect that this was Rong Ju's doing! It wasn't like he was dumb. Chuan Ning stepped closer, and Mo Yu backed away. He retreated farther and farther until his back hit the wall. Chuan Ning came to a stop before him. A long interval passed as he stared at Mo Run's face. When he finally spoke, there was a tightness in Shizun's voice, like he was choking back a sob. Why do you want me to come back so badly? So you can keep lying to me, angering me, leading me by the nose? I thought you turned over a new leaf, Mo Run. I thought you were worth teaching, that you had changed for the better. I thought I could teach you to be good. He closed his eyes slowly. After a pause, he said in a quiet voice, incorrigible. Shizun, get lost. Mo Run fell silent. Which part of get lost do you not understand? Chuan Ning's eyes flew open, his gaze frosty. Mo Yu, you disappoint me. How can you expect me to pretend I know nothing, to go back to the world of the living with you? Mo Run's heart clenched. Heedless of Chuan Ning's anger, he grabbed the wrist within that billowing sleeve and shook his head, begging with teary, reddening eyes. Shizun, please don't be angry. Tell me what happened, okay? Whatever I did wrong again, I swear I'll change. Just please don't chase me off. Change. That's what Mo Run had said back then, too. And had he? If Chuan Ning had met Rong Ju here, would he have ever found out about these unseemly deeds? It was said that concern will make a person rash. Chuan Ning was usually calm and collected, but he had a fiery disposition and acted on emotion when it came to matters of the heart. On top of that, Rong Ju and Mo Run had, by Mo Run's own admission, shared an improper relationship, and Rong Ju's performance had been so convincing that Chuan Ning had fallen for it completely. Unable to pull free from Mo Run's grip, Chuan Ning lifted his other hand to summon Tian Wen in anger. Of course, nothing appeared. He was mad enough to keel over. If he wasn't already dead, he would have been spitting blood. Suddenly, there was a brilliant scarlet radiance as Mo Run summoned Jiang Gui. What? He pressed the willow vine into Chuan Ning's hand and knelt before his Shizun. His other hand remained firmly wrapped around Chuan Ning's wrist. He was scared to death he might leave. Shizun, I know I've done plenty of things that made you angry and upset in the past, but since coming down to the I can't speak. But since coming down to the underworld, every word I've said has been true. He lifted his eye. He lifted his head, eyes brimming with tears. All of it was true. I didn't lie to you. Chuan Ning clenched his hand around Jiangwei. His heart burned with rage, yet at the same time he felt unbearably pained. Mo-run's fingers were wrapped so tightly around his wrist, they trembled uncontrollably, despairingly, but refused to let go. His agony was so palpable it nearly pierced the depths of Chuan Ning's soul. How could he possibly not feel it? If Shizun is upset, Mo-run continued, if Shizun can't forgive me, then please strike me, yell at me, anything is fine. And if you really don't wish to see me again, if you think I'm vile by nature, beyond remedy. Mo-run's voice broke on that phrase. He bowed his head where he knelt before Chuan Ning. If Shizun really doesn't want me anymore. He didn't want Chuan Ning to see him cry, but he couldn't stop the shaking of his shoulders as silent tears soaked the ground beneath him. Then I'll leave Xisheng Peak and never show my face before Shizun again. But please, I'm begging you. His forehead was nearly touching the muddy ground where he knelt, but his hand still gripped Chuan Ning's wrist so tightly, so stubbornly, as if he'd sooner die than let go. Please don't leave. Chuan Ning was silent. Shizun. Chuan Ning closed his eyes. You promised you'd come back with me, so please don't leave. Chuan Ning's chest ached. He was only a fragment of a soul, so how could he still feel like his heart was being stabbed by knives, scorched by flames? His eyes snapped open, shining with anger and resentment. I promised you. Then what about what you promised me? Back at the platform of sin and virtue, you said you'd seen the error of your ways, and then when you knelt in Clear Sky Hall, you said you'd never do it again. So why didn't you keep your word? Did you really think I wouldn't find out, Mo-wei-yu? That I wouldn't discipline you again? Mo-run started. He raised his head in a foggy haze of confusion and looked up through tear-filled eyes. What? The word had barely left his lips when Jiangwei flashed out bright and scarlet, tearing viciously toward the side of his face. There was an eruption of crackling sparks and blood splattered across the ground and the wall. Chuan Ning was incandescent with rage. He hadn't held back a whit. A bloody gash opened on Mo-run's cheek, bleeding profusely. But he paid it no mind as he clutched at Chuan Ning's hand. What do you mean, the platform of sin and virtue? He asked, wide-eyed. What about Clear Sky Hall? What am I keeping from you? What am I lying about? His questioning only made Chuan Ning more furious. He tried to shake off Mo-run's hand again, but his grip was like iron. Mo-run suddenly realized something was off here. Thank God! He whipped his head around to look back toward the storehouse. While the two of them were quarreling and completely distracted, Rong Ju had snuck off. He saw at once what had happened and his expression shifted. Shizun, we fell for his trap. Come on, we've got to go. It's not safe here anymore. Hurry. He made a dash for the door, pulling Chuan Ning behind him, but they had barely made it 2 steps when Rong Ju appeared in the distance, leading a group of ghost soldiers. Even now, he was still tattling. They're right this way, that living person and the soul that's with him, the two of them. I should have killed you, Mo-run roared furiously. There was no time to explain. Mo-run led the way, holding tight to Chuan Ning's hand as they sped down streets and alleyways. The number of their pursuers swelled, and the sounds of sentry whistles and clappers rang throughout the palace grounds. Chuan Ning glanced back to see 4 or 5 distinct groups of lanterns stream from the main alleys to gather into one mass, like a hissing snake of fire on the hunt. Rong Ju's face was fair, glowing with glee as he chased Mo-run and Chuan Ning. That frail body of his, weak from years of hardships and abuse, was pushed to its limit. He ran like a famished jackal bounding after its prey. He truly believed he had earned himself a great credit by being the first to sniff them out and turn them in. Drunk on this feeling of accomplishment, he unexpectedly mustered an aura of command. Catch them! Catch the living intruder! Someone grabbed his arm mid-stride. Rong Ju whipped around angrily, then faltered when he saw it was the captain of the guard who had caught him earlier. What are you grabbing me for? He snapped, indignant. Hurry and catch that man up ahead. Sure, they're runaways, but aren't you one as well? The captain narrowed his eyes, leveling him with a malicious gaze. I only ran because I wanted to help the Fourth Lord catch them. Rong Ju shot back, now alarmed. I was the one who found the living person. I was the one who discovered Mo Wei Yu isn't a ghost. Don't even think about laying hands on me just to steal my credit before the Fourth Lord. The captain was at first rather taken aback, but he soon put two and two together and burst out laughing. You found him first? Credit! You think I'm here to steal your credit? His laughter stopped abruptly. How desperate are you for distinction? Have you gone mad? The Fourth Lord himself discovered that living person. You think he'd seal off the entire Second Palace just to catch some common little ghost? Stealing credit, indeed. You must be blind, trying to steal credit from the Fourth Lord himself. In his shock, Rong Ju stumbled and fell to the ground. He watched as the army of ghost soldiers tramped past him in pursuit of Mo Run and Chuan Ning. Rong Ju trembled, and his lips quivered as he muttered, Already discovered? The Ghost King already saw through them? I'm not the first. No credit. All his visions of riches and fame, of being revered and admired by crowds lining the streets, came crashing to the ground to be crushed underfoot by the army stampeding past all around him. Rong Ju stared vacantly for a while. Then he suddenly flew into a frenzy, straining with every fiber of his being to struggle free. His frail body was like a mayfly, lowly yet unwilling to bend to fate, a moth flying into a hungry flame. His life had never been easy. All he'd ever known was a bed, men, wealthy madams, guests who came and went. A small and windowless room, filled with the scented haze from a brass incense burner, where it was impossible to tell dusk from dawn. That was his entire existence. It was a dark, never-ending night. He only wanted to see daybreak. For the sake of that ray of light, that chance at living, that tiny scrap of hope, he had been willing to abandon his dignity, his body, his honor, his kindness, his conscience. These were all he had. Flying into the flame for that bit of light. Wait for me, Chu Xianjun, save me! Seize that runaway. Once this is squared away, have him sent to the Fourth Lord himself for interrogation. No! Rong Ju's pale, bloodless fingers clawed at the ground, his hair falling loose and tangling into a disheveled mess in the struggle. Under the cold light of the moon, his charming, lovely face appeared eerie and terrifying. His eyes bulged as he screamed incoherently, No! Chu Xianjun, save me! And then, hysterically, I found him first! I found the living person! Me! You can't treat me like this! You never would have found him if not for me! You just want to steal my reward! My credit! The soldiers dragged him away, and his mad shrieks were soon drowned out by the heavy thunder of footsteps. That was the end of the chapter. I'm not sure if you could technically call him a foil, but if not, then he's pretty close. Rong Ju exists as the example of what happens when you never turn from your shitty ways. It doesn't end well for you. As opposed to Mo Run, who is genuinely trying to, considering everything Mo Run did in his past life, it's not like you can fully make amends, but he is trying to be better, right? And Rong Ju is what happens when you just commit to your shitty ways. But he's a really good what's the word? It's like that's the purpose he serves, but it's an extremely well rendered contrast to the main character's journey. And it has that edge of tragedy because it's like, what else was he going to do? And it's really hard. It can be really hard to nail down the difference between someone who turns around and starts seeking redemption and someone who doesn't. And in this case, it's like Meat Bun is saying that difference, what makes one person turn for redemption and one person just double down on, for lack of a better word, evil, is someone caring about them. And Mo-Run has that, and Rong Ju doesn't, and never really did. And that's a rather thought-provoking and accurate thing to say, Meat Bun. I'm with you on that one. Yeah. Damn, that's sad, yet deserved. Shit. Did I say we're on page 367 for chapter 119, which, by the way, is called Shizun's Four Souls Assembled? But we're also running late for that break. So hang on a second. How many? 66, 81, 71. Are we really only 15 pages away from... Then screw a break. Here we go. All right. Whew. Chuan Ning couldn't hear the words Rong Ju was shouting behind them. However, he only needed look around to realize Rong Ju had purposely provoked him back at the storehouse. He'd made Chuan Ning angry, then seized the opportune moment to escape and snitch. Chuan Ning was ordinarily the type to think things through rationally no matter the situation, but when it came to anything involving Mo-Run, all his rationality and calm seemed to evaporate into thin air. He was somewhat flabbergasted at the ease with which he'd been hoodwinked by a few words from a pansy like that. He looked to Mo-Run, who was running a few paces ahead of him, and asked, in spite of himself, "Did you ever go back to that immortal peach pavilion afterward?" Upon hearing this name he himself had nearly forgotten, Mo-Run stumbled. "Rong Ju, that dirty bastard," he yelled, furious. "Did he say I went back to Immortal Peach Pavilion? Why would I? Shizun, is that why you're mad? Because he said I lied to you?" Chuan Ning did not reply. "After the whole thing at the platform of sin and virtue, I never went back to those kind of places. I wouldn't lie to Shizun. If you don't believe me, you can use Jiangui to bind me and ask me then." After a second, Chuan Ning said, "No need." He glanced down at Jiangui, still tightly gripped in his hand, thinking how he had just injected spiritual power into the willow vine to whip Mo-Run bloody, without care or reason. That really had been... Wait, a holy weapon? Jiangui's flames illuminated his complexion, bright against the darkness of the night. Chuan Ning stared at it, his mind tossing and turning frantically. He tried reversing the flow of the spiritual power, drawing it from Jiangui into his palm, and instantly felt a strong, abundant power rush in. Suddenly, Chuan Ning knew where he could draw spiritual power. While such power could not flow between the living and the dead, the powers of a holy weapon cared not a bit whether the wielder was a human, ghost, god, or demon. As long as the weapon itself accepted, it made no difference. A good thing happened? It took Mo-Run a second to notice Chuan Ning had fallen behind. Once he did, he immediately turned back and asked anxiously, "Shizun, what is it?" The lash wound on his face still bled, and with those bright black eyes he looked all the more pitiful. Chuan Ning pursed his lips, chagrined and a little pained. He felt that he had wronged Mo-Run, yet his pride pointed out that Mo-Run really had entangled himself with the likes of Rong Ju back then, so the lash had not been wholly undeserved. Even after a moment's contemplation, Chuan Ning didn't know what tone he ought to take, or with what expression he should face him. He could only go the simplest route and speak with neither emotion nor expression. "Mo-Run, stop. Retreat back to the palace walls." "To do what?" Mo-Run asked hesitantly. Chuan Ning's tone was flat. "I'll show you a trick." Mo-Run was baffled. Before he could wrap his head around his Shizun's words, he saw the red light of Jiangui flowing endlessly into the fragment of Chuan Ning's soul, enveloping him in a curtain of flames. Mo-Run's eyes widened as he watched Chuan Ning and Jiangui respond to each other. Then the flames vanished. The man garbed in red and gold robes raised the willow vine high, hissing with threads of flames, and turned his head to address him. Mo-Run, give Jiangui an order. Mo-Run now had a vague guess as to what Chuan Ning planned to do, though he could scarcely believe it. He promptly shouted a command. Jiangui, heed Shizun's orders as you would mine. The willow vine in Chuan Ning's hand crackled, then erupted into threads of crystal-red sparks as the leaves on the vine glowed brilliantly. Chuan Ning raised his free hand and brushed his fingertips inch by inch over Jiangui. The willow vine coursed with a yet brighter radiance in the wake of his touch. The thousands of ghost soldiers were closing in now. Behind them, the barrier-sealed palace wall stood sky-high. There was nowhere to run. But then, Chuan Ning wasn't planning to. Light flared in his eyes and rippled outward, and a tempest roared to life. Chuan Ning's robes danced in the gale as he held the willow vine high and whipped it ferociously through the air. Jiangui struck out like a soaring dragon, glowing golden, resplendent, illuminating the vast night sky. At Mo-Run's command, Jiangui no longer rejected Chuan Ning, but instead channeled its abundant spiritual energy ceaselessly into Chuan Ning's earth soul. His eyes shone with that blinding brilliance, and his voice was deep and steady as he commanded, Jiangui, 10,000 coffins. In that split second, countless streaks of twining gold and red willow vines erupted from the earth with a rumble, lacerating the magnificent palace hall into broken shingles and chunks of bricks. Thick, powerful, ancient vines ensnared the ghost soldiers and dragged them in, then locked them down tight. Mo-Run watched in shock as all of this happened before his eyes. He saw the holy weapon and the fragment of Chuan Ning's soul working in concert, merging as one. He saw Chuan Ning's robes flutter, his jet-black hair like smoke in clouds. Whether in life or in death, his spirit had always been like this, earth-shatteringly blazing. Unstoppable. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Chuan Ning leapt backward and placed his hand on the palace wall. He closed his eyes, and in seconds he had discerned the weak point of the barrier. Up 9 feet 4 inches to the right. Attack with fire! Mo-Run followed his instructions without hesitation and leapt up. Before any of those ghosts of the second palace could react, the blazing fire spell had taken shape in his palms. He slammed it down right on the spot Chuan Ning had indicated. The earth rumbled and the mountains shook. The impossibly high palace walls rapidly disintegrated and returned to their original height, and the barrier seal shattered as well, crumbling to dust in an instant. Go! Mo-Run didn't need to be told twice. He hopped atop the wall, then turned to pull Chuan Ning up alongside him. The two broke free of the fourth Ghost King's second palace, their swift figures disappearing into the boundless night. Oh, scene break. In a small, narrow alleyway, Chuan Ning and Mo-Run leaned against opposite walls, both staring at each other, neither saying a word. I can't be the only one thinking that's a hot image, right? Maybe this is just an oddly specific thing that I love, but Mo-Run was the first to crack, letting loose a snicker. That old ghost will probably be so furious he'll die. As the corners of his mouth drew back, it pulled at the injury on his cheek. Chuan Ning eyed him. Stop laughing. Mo-Run stopped. In the dim alley, his lashes flickered and his gentle, pitch-black eyes gazed at Chuan Ning. Shizun, are you still mad at me? If he had said, Shizun, haven't you wronged me? Chuan Ning mightn't have appreciated it. But instead, he had asked if he was still mad. Chuan Ning wavered for a moment, then resolutely skirted the topic. Hurry and cast a spell. We barely escaped from the fourth king. He might not have the face to tell the other ghost kings just yet, but we can't count on that if this drags on any longer. The instant Mo-Run heard those words, he knew Chuan Ning wasn't leaving anymore. He wasn't going to disappear. And so his heart that had been drawn taut as a bowstring all this time finally relaxed. He couldn't help but grin again. But the more he smiled, the more it hurt, and his hand unconsciously rose to cover his cheek. Chuan Ning eyed him again, but said nothing. Mo Run produced the soul-calling lantern. He held it carefully before him with both hands and bowed his head as he wordlessly recited the spell. When he'd repeated it thrice, the soul-calling lantern flashed with a blinding light, so bright it made them squint. Mo Run could vaguely hear Master Huizui chanting, carried across the roaring waters of the land of the dead, carried unceasingly past the quiet and peaceful river of forgetfulness. Time to return. Time to return. The words were difficult to make out, as if they came from a great distance, but after many repetitions, that call to return seemed to come nearer. Then at once, the indistinct voice of Master Huizui rang in Mo Run's ears. Why are there 2 earth souls? The voice held a trace of concern. Mo Run closed his eyes and conveyed everything to Huizui with a thought. That faint voice fell quiet for a moment before speaking. You've met Chu Shun of Tailwind Hall? A long silence. Master? It's nothing. If Chu Gongja claims having 2 earth souls is normal, then it should be as he said, Huizui said. Only, this humble monk has never attempted to call 2 earth souls back from the ghost realm simultaneously, so this may take longer than expected. I will trouble Mo Shiju to wait a bit. Mo Run glanced at the 4th King's second palace. How much longer? He asked. We just ran from the 4th Ghost King's second palace, and they might catch up to us at any moment. Not too long. Rest assured, Mo Shiju. At these words, his voice became fainter still, and was eventually overtaken completely by the sound of the chanting. Chuan Ning couldn't hear Huizui's voice, and his brows were slightly drawn together as he watched. What's going on? There's something unusual about Shizun's souls, so the master says we'll need to wait, Mo Run explained. We're too close to the second palace here. Let's get farther away. Chuan Ning nodded, and the two walked a ways until they turned a corner. By this time, the skies were beginning to lighten, and the old man who had pointed the way for Mo Run before was preparing to pack up his wonton stall. When he spotted Mo Run, he appeared quite astonished. Hi, you found him? Mo Run hadn't expected to bump into this man again and blinked in surprise. Yes, he replied. Yes, I did. Thanks so much, Gramps. What are you thanking me for? It's all thanks to the little Shanjun's own good luck. Hey, your face is injured? Oh, it's a whipping from the ghost soldiers, Mo Run grasped for an excuse. No wonder. I was going to say nothing average can harm a ghost. The old man sighed. It looks painful. He pondered a moment, then reopened the drawer he had packed away and whipped up 2 bowls of small wontons, which he handed to the pair. These are only leftovers I couldn't sell today, but they're my treat. Eat something before you go. Mo Run thanked the stall owner, then saw him off. The old man ambled away, taking his stall with him. Chuan Ning didn't like scallions or chives, and the old man's wonton soup was peppered with scallions. Mo Run picked all the scallions out of his bowl before exchanging it with Chuan Ning's. Shizun, why don't you have this one? Chuan Ning fixed him with a look, but didn't decline. He lifted his spoon and took a careful taste. Mo Run watched him. The ice-cold soup of the underworld touched his pale lips, neither wontons nor soup diminishing, just the way real ghosts ate. Is it good? It's all right. Not as good as the wontons you make. You're gonna... He's already a ghost, Mo Run. Why are you trying to kill him again? More importantly, why are you trying to kill me? That can't be how you just drop that in there. No. Chuan Ning choked. He looked up and stared dumbfoundedly at the grinning man who sat beside him, chin propped in his hands. Suddenly, Chuan Ning felt like a river mussel whose shell had been pried open and left exposed under the sun without a single secret left. There was a long pause. What wontons? He asked. The young elder knitted his brows, his face stern, and feigned ignorance in a valiant attempt to preserve the teacherly dignity that had just been spilled all over the floor. There's no need to hide it anymore. Before that upended dignity could be rescued, it was shattered to pieces by Mo-run's hand, which had reached out to caress his hair. Chuan Ning was both furious and crestfallen. I know everything now. Chuan Ning looked away. Mo-run retrieved the lantern holding Chuan Ning's human soul from his Qian-kun pouch and placed it beside them on the stone bench. Shizun was awkward when alive, even in the underworld. It's still only your human soul that's forthright. I did make them for you. It was only... Mo-run cocked a brow and gazed steadily at him with a small smile. It was only because of what? This would be in his head. Only because I felt bad? Because I didn't want you to starve? Because I regretted it? Those were all words Chuan Ning could never speak aloud. Chuan Ning thought his own heart suffered an unspeakable affliction. He'd always been far prouder than the average person and considered things like showing kindness to someone, loving them, or becoming attached to them to be shameful. He had weathered the winds and rains of many years and had gotten into the habit of solitude, like a stern and solitary tree reaching toward the sky. A great tree like this did not quiver charmingly like flowers, stirring affection in people's hearts, nor did it sway gently in the breeze like a string of vines, seductive and enticing. He only stood in silence and severity, steady and dependable, wordlessly blocking wind and rain for those who passed by, allowing those under its branches to hide from the scorching sun. If she doesn't stop with this evocative ass, metaphorical ass, motherfucking... Perhaps he'd grown too tall, his foliage too dense. The people beneath wouldn't know that he was the one casting the gentle shade they enjoyed, not unless they made a deliberate effort to look up. But of all those travelers going to and fro, not one of them raised their eyes. Not one had ever noticed him. After all, most people's line of sight was habitually aimed lower than themselves, or at eye level at most. And so Chuan Ning had gradually grown accustomed to this, so accustomed that it had become second nature. He expected it. But no one in the world was born reliant or relied upon. There were some who clung to the strong. This type of person would become ever more charming, ever sweeter, and would limber their boneless bodies to curry favor, to beguile, to use honeyed words to carve out their place in the world. Does this sound familiar? And then there were those like Chuan Ning. From the moment he stepped into the cultivation world, he'd always been the one depended upon. People like him would become ever more steadfast, ever stronger, until at last even their face became iron, their heart steel. This type of person had seen enough of the vulnerability and incompetence of others. They had seen all there was of charm and sweetness, and thus refused to reveal even a kernel of weakness themselves. These were the sword-bearers, always standing at the ready in full armor. They could show no weakness, and they knew nothing of tenderness. After so long, it was easy to forget that every individual was born with emotions and affections, both fierce and gentle, that every person had, as a child, known how to laugh and cry, known how to pick themselves up after a fall, while also wishing for a pair of strong arms to help them stand. Jesus, meat bun! All right. Maybe, once upon a time, he had hoped that someone would reach down and help him up. But he'd waited once, and there had been no one. A second time, and still no one. He had experienced disappointment after disappointment, and he'd gradually grown inured to it. By the time someone, finally, came to help him up, it no longer felt necessary. It only felt shameful. It's just a little fall. It's not like I broke my leg. No need to make a fuss about it. And if the leg was broken, he was the type to simply think, it's just a broken leg, it's not like I'm dead, no need to make a fuss about it. And what if he had died? Even as a ghost, he might think, well, I'm already dead, no point fussing about it now. This type worked so hard to distance themselves from the fussy melodrama of the weak. Yet without realizing it, they would instead fall prey to a different kind of melodrama, a pride so stubborn it was like an incurable disease. Mo-Run stared at this incurable man, waiting to see what he would say. In the end, Chuan Ning didn't say anything at all. He only pressed his lips together and put the spoon down woodenly. He was very unhappy. Thus, half a moment later, he sprang to his feet. "Try casting the spell again," he said. I want to go into the soul-calling lantern." "Oh," Mo-Run blinked for a second, then laughed. "Is the soul-calling lantern a conch shell that you can go in and hide when you get embarrassed?" Jesus, Mo-Run! Man! Oh. Chuan Ning presented Mo-Run with a stern and solemn mine. Mine? Mean? Mine? It's another one of those words that I've seen more than said. He shook out his sleeves. "Embarrassed? And why, pray tell, should I be embarrassed?" Of course, Shizun is embarrassed because... "Stop talking," Chuan Ning exclaimed, angry and startled. He hadn't expected Mo-Run would actually be thick-skinned enough to come right out with it, and felt as though he'd been pricked by a needle. "Because Shizun is good to me." Chuan Ning fell silent. Mo-Run now rose to his feet as well. The red clouds of the ghost realm sailed across the sky, hiding the dreary crescent moon that had peeked its head out to splash the ground with a layer of fresh frost and illuminate Mo-Run's face. He wasn't laughing anymore. His expression was solemn and sincere. "Shizun, I know you're good to me. I don't know if you'll still remember all this once your souls have returned, but no matter what, I still want to say it. From now on, you're one of the most important people on earth to me. This disciple has done a lot of stupid things in the past, and even though I clearly had the best Shizun in the world, my heart was filled with resentment and hate. Looking back now, I'm filled only with infinite regret." Chuan Ning watched him. "Shizun is the best Shizun. And this disciple is the worst disciple." Hang on, I have to metaphorically fling myself off a cliff. And that process takes decent visualization. I really don't like her. Chuan Ning had at first felt uneasy. But as he listened to Mo-Run try to express himself with his pathetic vocabulary, doing his utmost, yet still so clumsy, Chuan Ning tried to resist, but in the end he couldn't stifle a faint smile. "I see." He nodded and repeated, "Shizun is the best Shizun, and this disciple is the worst disciple. At least you finally got some self-awareness." Chuan Ning wasn't a greedy person. He gave freely to others, but never asked much for himself. Perhaps he didn't have Mo-Run's affection. But to be an important person to Mo-Run, to be the best Shizun to him, that wasn't so bad. When it came to feelings, he had always been destitute anyway, desperately poor, yet refusing to beg for more. And now here was someone willing to give him a small piece of warm flatbread to munch on. He was awfully happy and savored that flatbread in tiny bites. This was enough for him. My dude! We have got to get him to stand up at some point. Ugh. That dummy Mo-Run, on the other hand, when he saw that he had made this piece of soul smile as well, he was a bit stunned. And his heart swelled with inexplicable joy. "Shizun, you should smile more. You look prettier when you smile. Chuan Ning stopped smiling. Here was that stubbornly prideful disease of his which made him think looking pretty to be the sort of flirtatious praise directed at wild weeds like Rong Ju. He wanted no part of it. Honey! But Morun, with his woeful judgment, was still agonizingly trying to praise his dear Shizun. Shizun, did you know? When you smile, how can I describe it? He was racking his brain trying to think up a phrase that could I'm sorry, there's too much. There's simply too much happening. That could adequately describe the beauty of the sight he just witnessed. Something related to smiles. The watchman's rattle of the underworld clapped thrice again. Inspiration struck. Of course, he blurted out, it's a smile in the underworld. This comes with a footnote. To smile in the underworld is an idiom meaning to smile in one's grave, i.e. to die with no regrets. Morun has taken it literally. Chuan Ning was speechless again, and yet we understand. And now he was genuinely mad. He acted like he hadn't heard and abruptly pulled his sleeve aside to pick up the soul-calling lantern. Moa you, he scolded sternly. All this yapping, and you still can't cast the spell. One more word of nonsense, and I'll march back to that fourth king's palace myself. Better that than returning to the mortal realm to listen to your drivel all day. Morun was dumbfounded. Smile in the underworld. Had he used it incorrectly? But Chuan Ning did have an especially pretty smile, and they were currently in the underworld. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't like he was dumb. Bickering out in the open like this would draw too much attention. Morun had no idea where he'd misstepped, but if Shizun told him to shut up, he would shut up. Thinking this, he scratched his head and dragged Chuan Ning into a more out-of-the-way corner. The steady chanting in his mind had by this time grown louder. Morun ventured to ask Huizui, Master, are you almost ready? It was quiet for a moment on the other side. Then came the hollow knocking sound of a wooden bell, that comes with a footnote, also known as a wooden fish, a Buddhist wooden percussion instrument used in rituals and to maintain rhythm during chanting. Then came the hollow knocking sound of a wooden bell, and Huizui's voice, crystal clear, spoke as if right beside his ear. Almost. Huizui's voice had just faded out again when motes of golden light began to diffuse from Chuan Ning's second earth soul. His figure grew fainter and fainter as the golden light scattered until, finally, it shattered into millions of streaming fireflies, which flowed into the soul lamp like the stars of the Milky Way. We couldn't get art of that. I think it's like the first time where I'm like, show me the art, and we don't have any. Not to my knowledge. It doesn't look like it. Morun could hear Master Huizui chanting, carried across the roaring waters of the land of the dead, carried unceasingly past the quiet and peaceful river of forgetfulness. Time to return. Time to return. All mortal sufferings were gradually washed to a faded white by the sighs of that Buddhist chanting, distant yet close. Morun hugged the soul-calling lantern and felt his body become lighter and lighter, emptier and emptier. One crisp tone from the wooden bell. It cut like a sharp knife, brutally shattering the trance-like recitation. Morun's eyes flew open, and he jolted back to himself. Everything from the ghost realm had vanished, like he had woken from a long dream. He found himself lying on a bamboo raft, moored by Sishung Peak's Naihe Bridge. The waters beneath the bamboo strips lapped and splashed around him. The sky was the blue of a crab shell, dyed with a smear of pale red. The bamboo leaves on the shores of the great river danced in the breeze, the thousands of whispers of their millions of leaves tender in the air. Dawn was about to break. Morun blinked dazedly. When he discovered the soul-calling lantern he had held in his arms was gone, he sat upright in a rush, scared out of his wits. Shizun! Don't yell. said a voice evenly. Mo-Run panted like he'd awoken from a nightmare. His face was pale as he turned his head and saw Huizui kneeling on the shore, knocking on a wooden bell set upon a rock, his clear eyes open. Even if you yell, he won't hear you. The soul-calling lantern rested beside the wooden bell, radiating... The soul-calling lantern rested beside... I think there's an extra word there. Beside the wooden bell, radiating with light, glowing and magnificent. The force of Chuan Ning's soul was indescribably beautiful. Huizui picked up the lantern and rose to his feet. He nodded toward Mo-Run. You've done very well, young Shiju. Mo-Run clambered to his feet as well and leapt easily from the bamboo raft to the shore. He tugged anxiously at Huizui. Master, shall we go find Shizun's mortal body in Frost Sky Hall? Let's go now. If we wait too long, I'm afraid his souls will disperse again. Huizui couldn't hold back a chuckle. How could the souls disperse so easily? Don't worry. This humble monk has already sent Shui Shiju to speak with your esteemed sect leader. Chuan Ning's mortal body should now be on its way to the Red Lotus Pavilion. I will go into seclusion there while I... Once again, there's just too much happening. I will go into seclusion there while I perform the rite to transfer your Shizun's souls back into his body. Then let's go quickly, Mo-Run urged. When he saw Huizui's faint smile, he hastily added, I mean, do take your time, master. No rush, no rush. But nothing about him indicated that there was no rush. His brow was obviously furrowed, his feet were striding forward of their own accord, and he almost wanted to reach out to pull on Huizui's sleeves. Huizui shook his head. He sighed, then said with a smile, The young Shiju needn't be so impatient. Mo-Run waved his hands. No rush, no rush. Slow and steady is best. Indeed, steadiness is important. When souls leave the body, they cannot immediately return to the flesh. To do so would go against the laws of heaven, and the souls would naturally dissipate. Certainly, this humble monk will go slowly. Right. Good. Do it slowly, Mo-Run agreed. Even so, he couldn't restrain himself, and after some hesitation, he asked very carefully, Then, how long will it take before Shizun comes back to life? What? What the f... Then, how long will it take before Shizun comes back to life? Huizui replied tranquilly, 5 years. I see, 5 years is 5 years! The color drained from Mo-Run's face. He felt like he was choking. 5 years at least. Mo-Run was struck absolutely, completely, totally speechless. Five years at least. 5 years at least. 5 years. At least 5 years. Okay? I... Five fucking years. Which means Volume 4 is either going to start with 5 years later, and then we kind of go back in and filter out some stuff, and maybe like, there's a short story after. How is there a short story after? What? Oh, wow. That's just like a page and a half. Oh my God. Okay, hang on. I gotta have a moment real quick, and then we'll move on. So Volume 4 is either going to start with 5 years later, or we're actually going to be put through the paces of 5 years for a little bit, right? Oh yeah, no, I got it. Just give me a second. But see, the thing about 5 years is that on one hand, I'm like, 5 years, what do you fucking mean? And I'm like so incensed, and I'm like, why can't they just be together now? But excuse me, this would be the perfect opportunity to pretty much age Mo-run up. Physically, obviously. Mentally, he's still coming on from the past life. So this would make him what? How old now? Thank you! Anna was reading my mind. 22. He will be 22. And no longer 17. I wonder why that is. I wonder why Meat Bun did that. Who can say? Meanwhile, a page and a half of just a short story that is literally called The Little Puppy and the Big White Cat. I'm going... It's just a page and a half. This is fine. Once upon a time, there was a little puppy. He was dirty and stupid, so nobody liked him, and thus he drifted around from place to place without anywhere to call his home. One day, the little puppy's uncle found him and carried him back to his den. The new den was warm and spacious, and the little puppy was very happy. He was especially taken with the big white cat, which was curled up on the cushion sleeping and looked exceedingly gentle. The little puppy howled and joyfully burrowed into the white cat's soft fur. However, the big white cat, when awake, was very different than the little puppy had imagined. The cat always watched the puppy with an icy gaze and ignored the puppy's whimpering affection. When the white cat was unhappy, he would seldom ever remember to retract his sharp claws before swatting the little puppy across his furry face. By and by, the little puppy grew into a big dog. Over 5 years, maybe? And as he did, the big white cat gradually became a small white cat before his very eyes. The big dog wanted to teach the white cat a lesson. So he bit into the little white cat's throat and proudly trod that snow-white ball under his great paw. But when he did, he at once realized that this white cat, which he had presumed to be as hard as stone, in truth had a body as soft as could be. He couldn't help but remember the night he had first come to his new den, when he had hidden and fallen asleep in the warmth and softness of this kitty's silky fur. How was the little puppy to know that on that night the white cat had opened his jewel-like eyes? Where did this little thing come from? How dirty it is, the white cat thought. Then, using his rough pink tongue, he had quietly groomed the little puppy's fur clean. The little puppy had stirred under this treatment, bleary-eyed, and thought that he was dreaming. He dreamt that his life of lonely wandering had finally come to an end, and that there was a big white cat that treated him very, very kindly. Who? Thank you, Liv. Was this necessary? Did you? Who give? How? The audacity of this woman. She is going to... Oh my God! How did I... No, okay, all right. So, like, the cover has the dog and the cat thing happening. But I was just like, oh, because, husky, white cat, Shizun, like, yeah. No. Absolutely not. Who does this woman think she is? Well, we're ending bang on right on time. Today, we are just going to pick right up with Volume 4 on Thursday, as I drop my pen, which is another good thing, because I swear to God, if this had been like a Thursday and we had to wait until Tuesday, or if I, for whatever reason, had been like, oh, we're going to have we're not going to have a session on Thursday, just a little bit of a pause between volumes, thank God I didn't do that. Thank freaking God. And to the best of my ability, I'm not going to do that for the rest of Erha, because sometimes I do. It just kind of depends on, when things happen. It's just it's all up to me anyway. It just sort of depends, should I do that or not? And I'm not doing that for no, not for Erha. I'm putting in no, other than the larger breaks, sure. But the smaller ones, no. Because if I had to wait a whole ass week before we started Volume 4, I would not be okay. I simply wouldn't. Oh, Selfie, thank you for asking. Selfie's asking how I am because I read a lot today. This is indeed the first day where I am pretty much reading for 2.5 hours instead of 2, what with the new warm-up streams and everything. And I'm doing pretty good, actually. It felt pretty nice to have a little half-hour warm-up thing. That actually felt really nice. I felt like I was able to come into this stream with more energy, like right out of the gate, and I've already been reading, and it was really nice. And it was also like a lot of fun. It's kind of an odd word to say considering how the straight romance novel started, but the stream itself was a whole lot of fun. So it got me all nice and primed to come in and be bitch slapped by this woman for the end of Volume 3, which was an absolutely fucking banger volume, by the way. That's going to be a hard one to beat. Not that I don't think she'll do it. I'm just saying that's going to be a hard one to beat. I can't imagine, and this might be tempting fate, but I can't imagine finishing this series and then looking back and being like, oh yeah, Volume 3, yeah, whatever. Which, that's not an invitation, meat bun, okay? I'm just saying. Volume 3 was a particularly high watermark, and it's not like the first 2 volumes were slackers or anything. I don't know, man. I don't know, man. I don't know what you want me to say, man. And it's 5. So I guess I'll go. It's really sweet that we've got, and pretty surreal to look in the chat and see that there are a couple of channel members here, just because channel memberships are so new, but we still have a few. They're very new channel memberships. But if you want to join, if that's how you would like to support the channel, if you don't want to bother with Patreon, then that is what the YouTube channel memberships are for. Right now, all you get for channel memberships is, besides the lovely little stars that you see behind people like Tuxedo and Liv, or next to their names, you get the warm-up streams with the, straight romance novel and all that fun time. Right now, it's only that, but I imagine I'm going to figure out how to get, YouTube members to slip them some more perks, right? Because it's hard to give you perks on YouTube when YouTube has their thing with copyright. So I can't do what I would normally do, and a lot of the things I do on Patreon, just because of the way YouTube runs things. But if you don't want to bother with another platform or another website to go to, you can now support the channel by joining here, just without doing anything. So Jesus, I'm sorry, book 8 is landing in a week, and there's 11 volumes total, and book 8 lands, okay, now that we're a little bit more into the year, I will have to go and revisit the release drop schedule for the rest of Erha. Because, like, ideally, I would want to kind of get caught up as close to the drop of the final volume as possible and sort of make up the distance between then and kind of schedule accordingly. I don't know. I feel like we can do it since we'll be on track to finish volume 5 before we take the next large break. And then when we come back from that, which I already know what we're reading for the break, by the way, but I haven't told you guys yet. But I know. I know. And if I have it my way, that stream will literally be on Gaywatch's 5-year anniversary. So what I get to do for 5 years of Gaywatch is sit here and read you gay things. And that's pretty special to me. I don't know if you could tell. But what we will be reading on that day, I have not yet announced, but I know. So since we're finishing volume 5, I might be able to get caught up in time. I'm not sure. I'll have to revisit the release schedule. I will tell you. I don't know. Do I want to confirm or deny anything? No, not yet, because it's only March. And 5 years of Gaywatch is on May 1st. May 1st is when the first video on this channel went up. And so that was the birth of Gaywatch. So it'll be on May 1st is when we'll do the stream. But since that's like just under 2 months away, I'm not telling you what we're reading yet. No, maybe I'll figure out like a fun way to do that. I don't know. It is up your alley though. You're here for Erha, right? The only hint I'll give you, and I will not confirm or deny any guesses, is that it's up your alley. It aligns with your interests. If you like Erha, this should be good for you. Even if you've never read it, this should be good for you. That's all I'm saying. Yeah, it doesn't really tell you anything, does it, Tuxedo? Yeah. Oh, imagine that. So. Oh, you missed most of the stream, Bucky. That's fine. That's fine. That's why they go up immediately, right? So that people don't have to worry about it. It's just nice to catch it in time. Why am I so chatty today? It's 5:05. I need to go. Y'all need to stop being interesting. I need to go. So I will see you on Thursday for the start of Volume 4. I haven't even looked at the cover for Volume 4. I will try not to do that until I sit down to read for you guys on Thursday. So on Thursday, we now technically start at 2:15 with straight romance novels for our little reading warm-up I just said this, at 2:15. And then at 3, as per usual, we sit down for more Erha. Yeah? That's what we're going to do on Thursday. I love you all very, very much. I hope to see you on Thursday. You should probably come already incensed and angry at Meat Bun because God knows I will. Have a lovely rest of your day. No. Freudian slip. Have a lovely rest of your day. I will see you on Thursday. Bye.